A happy Easter to each and every one of you. May this, the biggest feast day that we have, be a truly joyful celebration, even though you are not with a church full of people. Your home doesn't have a steeple, and yet today it is your church. We can still sing our Alleluias. Mary Magdalene was the very first person to come to the tomb that first Easter morning. And Alleluia was the very last thing she would think of singing. She came to mourn the death of someone very dear to her. She had placed all her hope, all her trust, and her love in Jesus. And evil people took that hope away from her when they cruelly crucified him. But then she saw the tomb was empty, and she quickly ran to the apostles. Peter and John came to the tomb, and both of them noticed the linens, but it was John who saw and believed, even though he still did not fully comprehend the whole of it or what really happened. Now Mary stayed at the tomb and wept. When Jesus came by and asked her why she was weeping, she didn't even recognize him because her mind was fixed on finding a dead body. Not until Jesus calls her by name does she recognize him. Her beloved teacher is alive. She went back to the apostles and told them, "I have seen the Lord." And then she shared everything he had said to her. Throughout history, people have had many different gods. And sometimes they couldn't even tell one from the other. But we have absolutely no problem recognizing our God, because he's the only God with scars. It's this God who comes to visit his friends that first Easter night. The disciples are afraid and confused and hiding behind closed doors. They had just lived through 3 of the most horrific days of their lives. They lost their best friend. And then, though the doors were locked, suddenly Jesus stands in front of them, and at a time when they needed him most. Jesus offered them his peace. It seems they didn't recognize him either. Then he said once again, "Peace be with you. And look at my scars." Now they know him by his scars. More than 2,000 years later, we are celebrating the resurrection, even though it's in our own homes, instead of in the crowded churches throughout the world. We sing our Alleluias, as we should, because our hearts are filled with joy, the joy of new life that comes from the Lord of life. Jesus is alive, and we should never allow anything to fill our hearts with so much grief that we forget Jesus conquered death. Whether the day is calm or stormy, whether we are in good health or bad, whatever comes our way, nothing can change the fact that Jesus walked out of his tomb and that he is present even now in all of us who have faith in his word. If we could really understand the meaning of the resurrection, then we will always have reason to be happy. St. Paul Paul put it so beautifully when he said, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. That's all I want. We believe that Jesus is risen, and we have cause for great joy this Easter day. Never mind that we don't live in a perfect world, which causes us much pain and a lot of sorrow, like in this time of grief. Like Mary, we have a friend who understands, a friend who calls us by name. We can lay our frustrations and disappointments at his feet, and he will call us by name and give us his peace. And then he will ask us to do what needs to be done. We will likely be scarred, but working for peace has to be a top priority for us. Do we recognize him? Do we recognize him when he calls us by name? We see the risen Jesus as we read his book, the Scriptures. We see him as we receive him in a spiritual way in your own homes. And we see him in a family and the loved ones who are with us today in our own little church. Alleluia. God, fill your hearts with much joy.